Today is December 13th, 2006. My name is Sue Paul, and we are at the Warhawk Air Museum in Nampa, Idaho. I am conducting a Veterans History Project in conjunction with the Library of Congress, and today I will be interviewing Mr. Robert Wayne Lauritsen. Welcome to the Warhawk Air Museum, sir.
Thank you.
Also present in the room with me are Pat Cosgrove, Don Bittler, and Jan Peterson, all a part of the interviewing team. Sir, could you please state your full name for us?
Robert Wayne Lauritsen.
Could you tell us where you were born and the year that you were born?
Okay. August 29, 1926 in Omaha, Nebraska.
And could you give us your current address?
The current address is 2901 North Willowside Avenue in Meridian, Idaho.
And could you tell us, sir, which war or wars that you served in and the division of the military that you were in?
Yes, I joined the Marine Corps on December the 8th, 1943, and served until August of 1946. I was called back into the service 5 years later on October 1950 and served with the 7th Marine Division in Korea for right about a year.
Thank you very much, sir.
It's going.
Bob, you were born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1926. Did you live in Omaha, Nebraska as a child?
As a child, I didn't travel over 50 miles from where I was born until I went into the Marine Corps.
What was it like in Omaha, Nebraska? That was during the Depression.
It was like Boise was about 10 or 15 years ago. It's now, of course, up in the 400,000, so they're a pretty good size city.
That was during the Depression years that you were there.
I remember the Depression years as being the happiest part of my life as a child. My sister, who's 8 years older than I, will tell a completely different story, how rough our folks had it. But to me, just oblivious of the tough times. So,
what did your father do for a living?
He was an electrician, journeyman electric, guy that wires your house and rewires motors and stretches wire and does all that sort of thing.
And you had one sister?
I have a sister and a brother, the brother's now deceased, and he was my sister's twin.
So you were the baby in the family?
I was the baby.
And tell us about growing up in Omaha. What were your interests in high school? And
well, just being boy, I guess. By the time I got to high school, I discovered girls. I played varsity football, pretty good at it, I might add, and lettered in track and in basketball, and loved it. I wasn't a good student. I wished I were, but I wasn't. But I never regretted school. I loved it.
And so you were about 15 years old. How old were you when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor?
14 or 15.
Yeah. And do you remember that day? Do you remember?
Very much so.
Tell us about that day.
Very interesting. When we found out about it on the radio, my mother at the time was in the hospital. She had gone through some surgery. And my dad and I were getting ready to go visit her in the hospital. Of course, the information we were getting was awfully sketchy, hours old. But by the time we got to the hospital and all, my mother drew me to her side and she said, son, he said, this is awful about bombing Pearl Harbor. And I said, yeah, I don't even know where that's at. And we didn't, honestly. She says, thank God you're only 15. You'll be too young to get involved. And I'm told by the nurses, this thing will be over in about 6 or 8 weeks. Well, little did she know.
Did your brother go into the service?
My father?
Did anyone else in your family go into the service?
My brother was in the service, and he was discharged with a medical discharge.
And so you stayed in high school then, the first couple of years of the war. You were still in high school?
The attitude with young men like myself at the time was get in the service, do something, win the war. I went to summer school 3 straight summers to take on extra credits, so I graduated in 3 years. The last year I was just sitting there floundering, waiting for June to come. And
Why did you pick the U.S. Marines to join?
Always loved them. Always wanted to be a Marine. My mother was a Marine. I mean, she brought us up that way. And I think she'd have been disappointed had I selected any other branch of the service.
So what was it like the day that you joined? Did any of your friends join with you?
I think so. I pulled a dirty trick on my mother. Never quite got over it. I was sitting in a study hall on December the 8th, 1943, and my buddy Marshall was sitting across the aisle at his desk, and I was reading the Reader's Digest about John Bassolo, and I pointed his picture out here, who had just stopped an entire Japanese regiment at the Tenarue River on Guadalcanal. I says, man, that's what I want to do. I got to be a Marine. I said, let's go down and join the Marine Corps. He said, okay. We got up and walked out of that study hall, down to the recruiter. He didn't hesitate. He filled out all the paper, and he sent us to Fort Crook. It was an old Army installation there in Omaha for a physical. We came back, and I said, well, how long do we have now? And he said, well, as soon as you get your mother's signature on this, you're gone. I said, when's that? It's 8 o'clock tonight on the troop train. So I went home and I told Mama that I'd joined the Marine Corps. She says, oh, that's fine, son. She knew I'd be drafted that summer. She said, oh, that's wonderful. Well, you'll make a good Marine, so all that old stuff. And says, you know, your dad's going to be a little upset over this. Well, when he got home, wasn't upset, but he was concerned. And finally, my mother came to bat. She says, Milt, he wants to be a Marine. I'll let him go. They both signed the paper. She says, well, when do you think they'll call you, son? I said, tonight at 8 o'clock on the troop train. And I left that night. A blizzard. It took 2 days to get to Cheyenne, Wyoming, 500 miles away.
Was your friend with you?
No.
So you're by yourself?
Whether he got his parents to sign or not, I don't know, but that was the last I ever saw him. So.
And so, did you have a girlfriend at that point, or were you leaving behind?
I had a little gal that I was kind of stuck on, you know. It wasn't really too serious.
And so you left for basic training, for your training. Where did you go? Where did they send you for your training?
Well, San Diego, Marine Recruit Depot, and it's 8 weeks. They totally dehumanize you and then build you up again, and I suppose that's what makes most Marines.
Was it more difficult than what you expected?
Well, it was different. I'd always been a fairly disciplined person, but this was a whole different ballgame.
I'm showing a picture of the 1144th Platoon, U.S. Marine Corps, 1943 in San Diego, and I'm pointing out you.
Mm-hmm. It might be interesting at this point to really look at those pictures. Those are all young faces.
You were 17.
17. And everybody that I was associated with there was in that bracket.
How long were you at San Diego?
8 weeks.
8 weeks, and then where did they send you?
Camp Pendleton, Oceanside, California.
Did you know yet what you would be doing in the Marines? Did you know what they were training you to be?
Not really, but within about 5 days. We were sent to the camp. They separated a bunch of us. This bunch went that way, that way. You didn't know why. In about 5 days, I was informed that I was to be assigned to the 13th Marine Regiment, and that was an artillery regiment.
Do you know why they assigned you to artillery?
I had a suspicion. Probably due to my age, you couldn't be sent overseas and put into combat at 17. You had to be 18. Well, at 17, though, I could absorb a lot of training. So we were just selected on that basis, I guess.
And so how long were you at Camp Pendleton?
Until, let's see, September.
And during that time, then you were trained?
Training in the field, shooting off the guns, hiking, schooling, that sort of thing.
What size weapons were you using?
Personal weapon?
That you were being trained to use in the
Oh, the
artillery?
105 howitzers. Roughly a 5-inch shell.
This is a picture of your typical training. There's a tank here. Were you trained then to follow tanks?
We would take training like that. Mostly it'd be the infantry that would be following the tanks. But we all got a part of that training to follow. They led the way. They had more armor than we had.
And what division were you with at this point?
5th Marine
You were
Division.
with the 5th. How many weeks were you here?
It'd be from roughly February to September, so 6 months.
Did you receive any further training in the United States, or did you then receive your
No.
orders to go overseas?
No, we left the States in troop transports, and we went to Hilo, Hawaii, where we were transferred to a sugarcane railroad flat car and taken up to a little town called Kamuela. It was the headquarters of the Parker Ranch, the largest ranch in the United States. And it was called Camp Tarawa. It's where the Marines that came back from the Battle of Tarawa recouped and started to build this camp. Then they moved out again, and then we moved in behind them. And that's where we trained them until the following spring.
And this, you still trained with the artillery then? You
Oh,
were
yes,
still the
all
same
the way.
all the way through.
All the way,
All right. How long were you on the island?
about 6 months.
About 6 months
Yeah.
you were there. And then you received the orders for your division to move out?
Then what?
Then you received orders to move out
Oh yeah,
and to go to where?
Iwo Jima. But we didn't know that. We just went aboard ship. We knew it was combat, there was no question of that. It was just a matter of where and when. Well, the ship that I was on, unfortunately, spent 42 days at sea. All we did was go out and rendezvous while all the rest of the invasion fleet and support ships were catching up and joining until we were one huge armada. We sailed to Inuiatok, and from Inuiatok to Kwajalein, and then I got to back up. When we left Hilo, we went to Honolulu, and they gave us 3 days of liberty, and we had a ball. Well, they knew what was coming, so they were just giving us a good time. That's when we boarded ship again, and then headed across the Pacific.
You didn't have any inclination about D-Day at Iwo?
After we got to about Inuiatok, we had daily briefings, and they would show us maps like you had over here in the corner. That's exactly the sort of thing we looked at.
Let's stop for a second. Bob, could you show us on the map with the pointer stick where your route was from Honolulu?
Honolulu is right here. We went down to the Gilbert Islands to Kwajalein. We got to jump off the ship and swim and do all those kind of crazy things. From Kwajalein, we went to Inuiatok. From Inuiatok, then, we went to Saipan, where the final arrangements were made, and then on into Iwo Jima. But from about Kwajalein to Saipan is when they broke out all of the plaster models, photographs, everything pertaining to the invasion. Where you would be, who you were, codes, passwords. I'll never forget the first day. The password was American-made automobiles. Well, my dad had an old Studebaker, and it was just getting dark, and I was climbing out of the hole, and the guy says, "Packard." I said, "Studebaker." I kept you from getting shot.
At what point did you realize fully the seriousness of the invasion that your division was going to be involved in?
The danger you're going to be involved in?
At what point did you realize that when you were on board ship?
So I don't think you really even think about that at that time. I do know this, that as we really got close, and we could start hearing the shells from the big naval ships and so on bombarding, you always had a few guys that suddenly professed their love for the Lord. And boy, if you get me out of this, I'll be a good boy. They weren't. That always bothered me. They go right back.
Is this typical of the type of maps that you were shown to prepare you for the landing?
This is extremely detailed. I don't think I've ever seen one quite this detailed. Lots of schematics. I recognize all of it, but they're positioning every gun that was being aimed at us, all of the beaches. It's pretty thorough.
Were you apprised early on about how the Japanese were dug in on the island? How they had?
Totally.
So you knew they were in caves. You knew they were under the ground.
They had to be somewhere, but I can't remember the exact number of days that that island was under bombardment. But they dropped enough shells on that to sink it. And they only killed some 20-odd Japanese in all that bombarding. We killed over 22,000 of them in hand-to-hand combat. So all that bombarding, they had 20 years to fortify the island. And that other little map that you and I looked at here had the positions of their guns. They had us zeroed in every square inch of the island. One of their howitzers up in here could hit down here. They didn't need a forward observer. They just would look at the coordinates, put the information on their guns, shoot the shell. They knew it was going to go. So they just played havoc all the time we were on the island. No one was ever safe on the island at any one time.
How many of you debarked at the same time? How many in your group arrived at the island and went off of your ships onto the island at the same time? About how many?
Well, I don't think I can answer that. My battery was 164 men. There's four batteries in four batteries in a platoon. I mean, a platoon has 164. And you've got four platoons in a regiment, so it starts to add up. I don't know if that answers it or not.
It does. Could you tell us about the day of the invasion?
Yeah. We were located out in this area, and I was in an LCVP with about 50 doctors that I was supposed to escort in and turn over to the beachmaster. I don't know why I was chosen for that job. Anyway, all we did was just float around. Just about everybody was seasick. This went on for hours. Well, the invasion came off at, I think, around 8:30 in the morning, the initial invasion, and I hit the beach about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was quite a while to be out there in a boat just bouncing around. We had a good view of it. Again, we were further down here with a, it was Zura or the Iowa. My memory starts to fade sometimes. We watched them fire those 16-inch guns direct fire right into that mountain. And we saw the planes coming in and dropping bombs, and it just went on. And we didn't realize that it was as bad as it was until we hit the beach, because we had no communication on the little boats. We didn't have ship-to-shore radio or anything like that. So we didn't realize how badly it was going. But the closer we got to the beach, we could see the boats that were run aground and blown up, the tractors, the tanks, the LCVPs, LSTs. The dead were strewn all terrible.
Was it flat where you?
No, it was flat, fairly flat for about 10 yards. And then there was quite a precipice. But it was that black sand that you've heard so much about. And you dig in and it would just collapse and dig in and collapse. It's awfully tough. And you had to get off that beach. You had to get off of it, so couldn't stop too long.
So what were your thoughts during that time, or did you have
What
any
the hell am I
thoughts?
doing here? That's all I can think of. That you realize then that they're playing, they're not playing games, they're playing for real. And that whistling noise going over your head and all, those are bullets. It's not the wind.
And so tell us about what you did. If you could continue with,
Oh, you just have to keep going.
you kept going up the hill.
Up the hill until I got up on top, and I saw a beach master up there and asked him where my outfit was, and he says, "You're practically there, it's right across that road." And when I got there, they already had the guns set up.
How many of the men that you came off of the boat with were with you, that made it there with you?
The boat I came off of, the LCVP, all the doctors got off.
I'm showing pictures out of the book that you brought because you said that this is exactly what it looked like. I'm showing pictures in your film because these really do, these are actual photographs that really do depict the landing. And it must have been just mass confusion and...
Just total confusion. Yeah. Well, we got on the island and we moved, so there had to be some organization, but you felt, as an individual, you felt like it was just chaos.
Could you tell where the enemy fire was coming from?
No. No.
How long do you think it took for you to get up to your destination, up to
Up
the
to
rest
my
of your...
gun?
Uh-huh.
Oh, within the hour after we landed. Within the hour. Not a long time.
And is that where you stayed then, once you got to
Stayed
your
there
home?
pretty much until towards the end when they were taking us as replacements for the infantry in mop-up operations. And that's when you revert back to the fact that all Marines are riflemen. And the front lines you go. But the dirty work had been done. The infantry, the ones that took the beating, and some of their units were totally obliterated. I didn't have it bad, not like they did.
And so how long did you stay in that position then? Were you there for days or for...
I was on the island for, let's see, from February 19th till March of 31.
How long did it take before the main part of the battle subsided on that part of the island? Before you felt...
over a month.
Over a month.
Oh, yeah.
Constant.
Oh, yeah.
Did you tell us about the Japanese? They were in tunnels. They were. I read somewhere that it was very difficult on the Marines because you couldn't see your enemy, so you couldn't tell morale-wise how well you were doing.
That's right.
Yeah.
You just didn't know. You didn't know where it was coming from. They'd pop up maybe one at a time, take a shot, go back in the hole. Next time they'd roll out a big howitzer and fire 15, 20 rounds, go back into a cave. And they just kept that up. You had to catch them coming out because they were very well protected. And they were what they call crossfire. This cave and this cave could crossfire and help each other. So it was doubly bad.
Tell us about when you heard that the American flag had been placed on Mount Suribachi.
It was about the fourth day, as I recall. They'd already put up one small flag. It didn't seem to draw too much attention, but we were located right here at the foot of Suribachi. And one of the guys in the gun section said, "Hey, look at that, they've raised a bigger flag up there." And I looked up at it and said, "How about that?" So at that time, we figured it meant that we were winning the war.
Did you climb to the top of Mount Suribachi? Did you climb up to the top?
No, no, no desire to. The darn hill was still full of landmines and all kinds of debris. We were too busy down here firing.
This is a picture of some of the men in your group with your gun. And then this is a picture of several of the caves that you mentioned that the Japanese had dug. Tell us why Iwo was so important. Small, little, tiny island, 8 miles long. I mean, why was it so critical? Why did so many
It's the
people die on that island?
best part of the whole story.
Tell us the story.
And although we lost 6,200 Marines, remember that on Motoyama number 1, it was large enough to accommodate a B-29. We had B-29s flying out of Saipan and Tinian. Those boys would fly all the way to Japan. Well, a lot can happen between, I forget how many miles that is, but it's horrendous. They'd get over there, they had no escorts because we didn't have a pursuit plane, if you will, that had any range to it. At that time, the P-51 was about the only thing that could carry enough fuel if they could get to them. So they had to fly over these areas virtually naked with no support at all. If they got shot up or lost an engine in dire straits, they had to crash at sea, plain and simple. I did see the first B-29 come into Iwo. In fact, we pretty well cannibalized part of it. I had a watch band I made out of aluminum that I don't know where it's at. But anyway.
What was it like when you saw the first American plane land there?
That's the first one I'd seen. And that was a big baby. Well, from that day on, we saved more American airmen and salvaged those airplanes than died on Iwo by a factor of 4 or 5 to 1.
And the Japanese would not let this island. They were willing to have 23,000 soldiers die because it was so close to mainland Japan.
700 miles.
Only 700 miles away.
So you see a B-29 could fly over there and back in no time, and with the P-51s that came aboard, they would escort them, so the zeros and all that didn't mean anything. It was a turkey shoot from then on.
When things subsided to some degree on the Mount Suribachi side of the island, did you move forward then into the other area of the island?
No, no need to. Again, a 105 howitzer can fire quite a distance, and when you're only looking 8 square miles of land, you could walk out there in 3 or 4 hours. So that gives you some idea how long it took, or how many died to take so little property.
Did you have a good indication, or did the other men with you? Did you all have a good indication that you were winning, that you were annihilating, getting rid of, killing the Japanese soldiers that were on there?
I don't know that we felt that way about it. We kept getting requests for firing our guns. That means they had targets. I do remember that those guns were being elevated in all different ways, so they were moving us around, but by numbers, not by feet. No, the guns. So we did a lot of traversing with the guns, and we kept firing almost up to the bitter end. Those cells are cheaper than Marines.
When did you find out that it was the end, that you'd taken the island?
When they told me it was when I'm going home.
Really?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, they just came in and just said, that's it. And they took us out in groups. And, we had to march down to the beach. They picked us up in LCVPs, took us out to an APA that was out that's a troop ship. The USS Golden City, I'll never forget it. When we got aboard, the captain apologized. It was obvious that the ship had been through something. Well, it had been shot out in the Philippines and was being sent home. But they were set up to pick us up, to take us. And he apologized because he didn't have much food aboard. We would get 2 meals a day, coffee and bread in the morning and an apple and bread at night. That was, I think, 15 days of that.
These are a few other pictures I'd like to show. It shows, I believe, I think it's the first flag that was raised, but also what it looked like on the island. There's a view here from the top of Mount Suribachi that you pointed out to me that shows what the beach looked like below. The island was rocky and desolate
miserable.
and miserable. You had a very close friend who died there.
Yes.
What was his name?
Clifford Ryan.
This is a picture of the two of you together.
Mm-hmm. That was taken in Hawaii.
He served with you on Iwo Jima?
Oh yes, that's where he got killed. He was a radioman in a Jeep, and he came in on the third day, and he got killed the same day.
Were you near him when that happened? Were you with him?
No.
Another picture that you pointed out to me that I think is important to show is the actual beach itself and what it looked like. Typically, with the ships and the beach blown up and this sort of thing that I'll show in the film also. And this is a 5th Marine Division's command post with Mount Suribachi in the background. What was the weather like? Did you have to suffer through
fairly
weather?
pleasant. I don't remember weather being a factor.
Tell us about when the B-29 came. Was it the first one to land on the airstrip, the B-29? What was that? Was it exciting? Was it just a sense
sure.
of what did the crew of the B-29?
Well, we did go up
do?
and greet them. They came in, and it just looked funny because we were aware of it. We could see them coming in with smoke coming out of, I think, just one engine. And he was kind of floundering coming in. And he sat down and rolled to the end of the runway. Well, there must have been about 50 Marines that were on that plane now looking for souvenirs. But they were still fighting up there on Noriyama #1 when he came in. A lot of small arms fire. But a real tragedy was days later, they brought in a squadron of P-51 Mustangs. And these guys were at the end of their fuel. They'd come in from Tinian. They were at the end of their fuel. They had to land, there was no question of that. Well, the Japanese had bombed out the runways again pretty bad, so there were a lot of potholes. And these guys were trying to come down and land with those potholes. You can imagine taking that P-40 and putting it down there with Idaho-type potholes. And they just would hit, roll over. I forget how many we lost that day, but there was a lot of them. Some got down, most ditched out at sea and were picked up and brought in. But they had to resurface and everything before they could let another bunch come in. But once the P-51s came in, I didn't know it, but you had to know the war was over because of what they could do.
Had there been any rumors of a bomb at all, a hydrogen bomb, or
No.
of course you earlier nothing? It was so secret that nothing.
We didn't even know what Iwo meant. We called it Iwo Jima. That became Iwo Jima. The bomb fell while we were back in Hawaii. In fact, we were loading ship for the invasion of Japan. That we knew. There was no doubt about that. When the bomb fell, it was what's an A-bomb? I mean, we were all confused. And of course, when you're in the middle of Hawaii, in the middle of the war, you don't get a lot of fresh news. Everything is secondhand. So I don't think we appreciated what happened until after we got to Japan to see the destruction.
This is a picture of a cemetery that you brought back.
Yes.
And this was a secret photograph, did you say to me?
It's a what?
This photograph, was this taken on Iwo Jima?
Yes, that's the 5th Marine Cemetery. It's in the form of a big cross.
Is it? It's formed as a big cross.
A big cross.
And this is your friend's cross.
Cliff Ryan.
Cliff Ryan's cross.
There are 3 of those cemeteries on Ewo. Third, 4th, and 5th Marine Division.
You were a part of one of the most significant, brutal battles of the history of World War II. And probably and you were 17 or 18 years old?
I was 18.
18 years old. Did you have any idea the significance of that during the time you were doing what you
No, we
told to
began
do?
to pick up things after we got back aboard ship. Some of the sailors would tell us, particularly how important the flag raising was and all. We had no idea.
So the hoopla or the excitement and the publicity about the flag raising on Iwo Jima, at what point, when did you get a sense of that, of your having been there when this happened, and how was it years later or?
Oh, yeah. It was a publicity thing, I think, for the States. If you happen to have seen that movie, Flags of Our Fathers, these 3 young men that were still living, they're all gone now, were brought back to the States to raise money through war bonds. And that's what got its hoopla. It was just in the Marine Corps, you always got flagpoles. I got one on my front yard.
So back then to when you were told that you were going home, how did you find out that it was time for your division to board ships and come back to the United States?
Going home from Iwo or
From
going
Iwo.
home?
From Iwo. When you were leaving Iwo.
Oh, just glad to get off the damned island. You got to remember that the body wasn't designed to wear the same clothes for 31 days
Really?
and eat out of a can or K rations. We would anything for some clean clothes and a shower. And I don't remember it being that exciting. It's just glad to get off the island.
And did you go directly back to Honolulu at that point?
Yeah, but in a wee talk they stopped. And no, we didn't go to Honolulu. We went back to Hilo, then back to Camp Tarawa.
Were you told right away that you would be that they would be preparing you for the invasion of Japan? Did you know that was the next fight?
It never came out quite that way. It just was assumed. If you looked at the maps and all, you could see we're now only 700 miles away from the mainland. And boy, we were taking on heavy replacements, and they were sending in Marine conscripts, really beefing us up with a lot of people. That's a sign it's going to be a big one. But other than that, it was just the normal routine training.
Where were you when the war ended?
In the Kamawela, there at the Camp Tarawa in Hawaii. I'll never forget the night because Jack Carson, I don't know if you remember him or not, it was funny. He was putting on a USO show that night, and we were out there watching him. And the word came that they shouted that they dropped the atom bomb, and they expected the war to be over in 2 or 3 days. Well, I don't know, several thousand guys there. They just went nuts, just plumb nuts.
You knew that the war in Europe was already finished. You knew
what?
the war in Europe was done. You knew that.
Yes.
And so then that ended. What happened to you then? What happened once the bomb was dropped? Was it quite quickly that you were given new orders?
I don't know about orders. They accelerated the training, but again, we were loading ship at that time. So an invasion was imminent. We knew we were going on an invasion. Where would it be? Japan. We had already invaded Okinawa, and that was only 300 miles offshore. So now we owned the highway, and we just knew that's where we'd go with Japan.
So when the bomb was dropped and the war ended,
Yeah.
what were your what
We just
happened?
kept going.
You did.
Just kept going.
So you went into occupational Japan then.
Oh, I spent 10 months in the occupation. Oh, yes, indeedy.
Tell us about going into Japan. What was that
Well,
like?
You're a glutton for punishment. We had an interesting detail. In Sasebo, it's on that map. It's on the southern part of Kyushu. That's all right. It's the southernmost city on the island of Kyushu. And that's the southernmost island. In a little town around from there is a town called Kawatana. My unit was sent into that immediately. We didn't know what for till we got there. When we got there, we knew. That's where they had built all of the kamikaze boats for the invasion. And this was basically a torpedo for the keel with a little shell built around it for the guy to steer the thing. And that was what was waiting for us. And there were hundreds of these boats. It was our job to disarm them and put them out of commission. We didn't know what to expect. But the occupation went quite well.
How did you feel about being around the Japanese people, having fought them, and now being there?
We were warned to be extremely careful, be diplomatic. If you don't like them, stay away from them. Well, I tell you, it doesn't take long to see how industrious those people are. When you see those little kids, fourth and fifth day, pick up their beer cans, cut out dolls and pinwheels and trinkets to sell for Chocolatto, you pick up with the kids pretty fast. And it went relatively smooth. I don't say I hated them. They were darn good fighters, obviously. But as I spent more time there, I learned to appreciate what they do. No animosity.
Did you see the results of Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Oh, I was stationed in Nagasaki.
In Nagasaki, what was that like? These are pictures that you brought.
I think I showed you a few pictures. Couldn't believe it. And when you think that that was a pinwheel compared to what they have today.
What was your assignment other than the crafts that you were, was that your main assignment was to disarm the crafts that you found?
That was our first assignment.
In Nagasaki?
Yeah. Well, it was
Outside.
Sasebo. After we disarmed the boats, we went into Sasebo for about a month or so, and then up to Nagasaki. I also had the advantage of going to Hiroshima. I was riding guard on a troop train, and we were in Nagasaki and Hiroshima both. So,
other than the desolate landscape, which we're seeing in these pictures, what about the effects on the people? Did you see much of that?
Not at all. Not at all. And there were lots of people.
I'll just show one more. You were in occupational Japan for 10 months. Were you riding home? Had you seen your family during any of this time at all?
Oh, no.
Nothing. You went right from Iwo Jima to occupational Japan.
Right.
So you were writing letters to your folks?
Yeah. I'm a prolific letter writer.
And you were not married, or you had not?
No, we were engaged. That was our engagement pictures.
So you had become engaged before you went to Iwo Jima? You became engaged?
Before I left the States, that was taken.
When you left occupational Japan after 10 months, where did you go?
Home. All the way to San Diego. 16 days on an old beat-up bucket of bolts. That was it.
And you knew that you would be leaving the service? Did you feel?
Oh, I'd be out.
Mm-hmm. And so you landed in San Diego, and when did you receive your discharge?
I made a mistake there. We did not go to San Diego. We went to Treasure Island in San Francisco, and I was discharged at Treasure Island.
And this is your honorable discharge from the United States Marine Corps. How did you feel about leaving the Marine Corps when you were
Happy.
discharged?
At the time, very happy.
It was good to be home.
Oh, sure, and I was hot to get married. Golly.
Where was your fiance waiting for you?
Where was she waiting when I came home? I called her, oh, wait a minute now. I've confused two things here. When I came home from the occupation, we did go to San Diego. When we landed in San Diego, we were in quarantine for about a week. Then I was allowed to see somebody. Well, I called her. She knew I was here. I called her, and she said, I'll be down, I think, on a Sunday. They called for me, and I went up to the reception room. And there she was with her mother. Well, she greeted me very stiffly, arms folded, scowl on her face. I said, what's up? She says, are you going to marry me, or aren't you going to marry me? I said, yeah. Okay. We embraced and kissed. So her mother brought her down. When I got home from Korea, we went to San Francisco, and I was discharged at Treasure Island.
But
And she, by that time, we already had children, and she drove up.
So you were married then in 1946?
1946.
Mm-hmm. And where did you live for the next 4 years before you went back in
We
the
started
military?
off, housing was pretty hard to come by for recently GIs. So my mother-in-law offered her double garage, and we rebuilt that into kind of a nice little house, and we lived there for 4 years. Then we moved to Arcadia, that's in Southern California, and from there to Whittier, and there to Los Alamitos. Then I began to get transferred. I was going up in my position, and I started getting transferred. We went to Cincinnati for a year, and Chicago for a year, and then back to the coast. So.
And then when were you called back into the service?
For Korea, that would be October 1950.
And you had how many children by then?
Two.
Two, a boy, girl?
Boy.
Both boys.
18 months between them.
And what are their names?
Bob Jr. and Jack Clifton.
So what happened when you were called back? Were you ready to go? Did you back into the Marines?
I was bitter. Things had changed. I had certainly more responsibility. I was called back in because I had joined the reserves. Well, that was not quite accurate. I had joined the reserves, but my enlistment was up. And I said, how come you can call me? And they said, well, you never applied for a discharge. Therefore, we have the right to call you back in. I had 11 days to report to Camp Pendleton. There were a bunch of guys in the same position I was in. They were fighting it, and they just said, no, we're not going. And they said, you are subject to being incarcerated. Said, we don't care, we're not going, it's illegal. Well, I wasn't about to fight it, and I went. I later learned, I don't know if this is correct or not, I later learned that they were just let go, nothing ever happened. But I spent darn near a year over there in the first winter, and that was a pretty bad winter. So.
This is a picture of you in uniform with your wife and two small boys.
Yeah, the little guy, Jack, was about 18 months old, and Bob was about 3.5.
How long were you at Camp Pendleton before they sent you to Korea?
Oh, not very long.
In artillery again, the same?
Well, yes and no. There was some mention made that during my time between my first discharge and being called back, I took up flying on the GI Bill. And I got my private, multi-engine, got my commercial, had hopes of doing something with it. And one of the reasons they used was, well, you're already trained to fly things like L5s and that sort of thing. And, well, I thought that might not be bad. But when they processed me that day, they processed me as an 0300, which is general infantry. But also with a caveat on that, that I was a fire direction control center officer during the war. So that meant I could direct fire from the bigger guns. And that's how they gave me a section of 4.2 mortars. I had never seen one. The Marines didn't have them during World War II. It was a mortar that was used in Italy by mountaineers, mountain troops. So I was kind of bitter about it. And the wife took a terrible beating financially, of course. We had just moved into our first new home. I was probably making at that time $800–900 a month, which 1950 wasn't too shabby. And I had to go down to $154.50. We declared a moratorium on the house. We lost our car. My employers and the employees of the company I'd worked for were bringing her care packages and stuff like that, and that really frosted me. Well, somebody took pity on her, and they suggested that she talk to the Red Cross, and she did. They went to work on it, and they got me a hardship discharge. So one day, I was up there on the hill, we were firing like crazy. Guy comes up and says, "Sarge, you're wanted back at regimental headquarters." I said, "What for?" He says, "Hell, don't ask me." Crawled out, walked back.
You were in Korea.
"Yeah, you're going home." I said, "Really?" "Yeah." "Oh, we didn't know that you applied for a hardship discharge." And I said, "I didn't." Well, anyway, I went home.
Back to Korea, you were there for a year. Where were you in Korea?
We landed in Busan. That's a pretty good sized town. What's the capital there? Seoul. Outside of Seoul. They had just one Seoul back. And we were waiting for the Marines to come down from the Chosin Reservoir. But they needed some help to get down. So they gravitated some of us up the coast and fought rear guard action while these guys came down through us onto the ships and then on down to Incheon. So I got a little taste of the winter.
The winter was very harsh.
Oh,
Did you engage in combat?
pardon?
Did you actually engage in combat?
With my mortars, oh, the whole time.
The whole time.
Never let up.
How was Korea different for you than World War II?
On Iwo, you could be injured or killed at any moment. That never let up, again, because they had everything zeroed in. In Korea, you'd be on the lines for maybe a week, real bitter fighting. Then they would relieve you, and you'd go back where that one picture of in the tent, where we're eating chow. That would be a relief area. You'd get a change of clothes. You'd get some fairly decent food. Get plenty of beer, and then about another 5 days, you were sent up to the front again. So you just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Did you have a sense in Korea that you knew what the war was about, the same way that you had a very definite sense during World War II?
You don't want me to get into politics, do you?
Just if you can tell us how you felt it then rather than now. Tell us at that time in your life, while you were in Korea, were you aware of why you were there, or was it later that you?
Only in that we were supposed to be fighting a war in behalf of the United Nations. This was not our war. And I saw some things I just don't really particularly want to talk about. But we were never going to win.
Tell us about Douglas MacArthur, what you felt about him as a military leader.
From the beginning. I think I said in the Marine Corps, during the war, MacArthur's name was not too popular.
Why is that?
Well, he was Army for one thing. He lived a pretty well privileged life. He hadn't done anything that any of us could say was spectacular, but that's a minor thing. When we got to Japan, and he headed up the occupation, I've never seen a country conform to an idea as they did to him. He spent his days, just like going to the office every day, in a Daiichi building. That was the main civic building. And the Japanese would line the streets, both sides of the streets, for 1.5 miles, 2 miles on each side, watching him come and watching him go. And if you read what he said during the surrender, there was no vindictiveness there. He wanted this to be right for everybody. And he went out of his way to make sure that the Japanese were not abused as the vanquished. And I would say that he gained stature with the Marines above and beyond. They put him right up there with some Marine generals.
What about George Patton?
George Patton, best movie Hollywood ever made. Oh, I'm serious.
Who did you admire the most in your military career? Did you have any one person that you think about that you believe was a great military leader?
Well, of course, you always got your friends and buddies. Are you talking about a leader?
Mm-hmm. A military leader.
Military leader. Well, there was a chap by the name of Roy S. Geiger, General, Marine Corps. He was an aviator, by the way. He was a Marine aviator. He interviewed my troops in Sasebo. I was at that time the permanent sergeant of the guard. We had companies of guardsmen that did patrolling and so on. And for some reason they chose mine for the review. And he came up to me and he looked at me and he said, "Well, Sergeant," says, "they look pretty good." He said, "Tell me, any problems?" We'd already been there like 9 months. I said, "Yes, sir, we have a pretty serious problem." He said, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "Well, these K rations and C rations are getting pretty old for these guys." He says, "You're kidding me." I said, "No." I said, "Especially when the Air Force is eating steaks over here, the Army is eating chicken over here every day, and we're still eating out of tin cans. I just don't think it's right. Sergeant, I'm going to take care of that." And that night we had fresh meat, fresh milk, fresh everything. It was the first decent meal we'd had, and, well, we were eating Japanese food, is what we were eating, for fresh food, which wasn't all that bad if you could stand the smell.
Did you feel that, you've mentioned that the Japanese soldier you felt was a good fighting soldier.
Oh.
What about the Koreans, that you were fighting, the North Koreans?
The ROK, Republic of Korean troops. There were some good ones and there were some that weren't very good. Primarily training. They just didn't have the training nor the equipment. A lot of people don't realize what it takes to fight a war, and they start a war and then they say, "Well, gee whiz, you're shooting at me, I don't like that." Well, they just really weren't capable of handling it.
You mentioned that we were fighting for the UN. The UN,
Yes.
It was a UN war. Was that a really new phenomena, a different feeling for you to be fighting for? The UN was very new at that point.
How I came to this conclusion about the United Nations was I had nothing against them. Could care less. Building in New York. When I was a floor observer calling fire for the 4.2 mortars, we took a hill that I remember as Hill 362. I might be off on that number. We'd take it in the daytime and then abandon it in the evening, and the enemy would come back and refortify it. The next morning we'd start all over, bombing, bang. send the guys up, get them killed, abandon that night. The third time this happened, we had a naval officer, and he was a senior officer in that Florida Observer Group. And I said, Lieutenant, I don't understand this. Why are we going up in the daytime and coming back at night, and they get to go up at night and go down in the daytime? He said, Sergeant, don't you know what's going on? And I said, no, I don't. Oh, let me preface this. We only had so many shells we could shoot a day. We didn't have an unlimited supply. You'd get a firing order of 3. You'd get a firing order for 5 shells sporadically. You could only carry 2 carbine clips for your ammunition and your carbine. 1 hand grenade. He said, you're not calling the fire. The United Nations is calling the fire. They're the ones running this war. We're just the characters on the stage. And I couldn't believe it. And he went into some detail. When I got home, I made it a job to find out what the United Nations was really all about. I know, and I don't like it.
When you came home, were you discharged right away? 1951, you received your honorable discharge and you were out of the military.
51? Oh yeah, I was all through.
You were not in the reserve any longer?
No.
Yeah. And so you were able to go back to your family. You were able to go back to your family, your wife and 2 small sons.
Yeah, she met me in San Francisco and we drove back.
And what did you do after the military? Where did you live and what work did you do?
Well, I had a job as a salesman with a Zollerback Paper Company. And while I was gone, my territory was absorbed. When I came back, even though they had to guarantee you a job, it just wasn't going well. So I left them and went to work for a chemical company and did quite well there. Spent 11 years with them, went up the corporate ladder, got to be a manager, regional manager, and then I left and joined 2 of my workmates that were with the same company, and we formed our own chemical company. And I was with them for an awful long time. Then they started getting older and dropping off, and the British, we were up for sale. We had a parent company. So we got all our money out of it up front and still had a job. But the British bought us. So the last year and a half, 2 years, I worked for a British firm, which was quite interesting. I got to travel extensively through Europe and around.
And so do you have grandchildren today?
Pardon?
Do you have grandchildren?
Oh, I have grandchildren. I got a lot of them. Yeah, I've got 6 grandchildren. I've got 5 great-grandchildren.
That's incredible. The medals and special service awards that you received because of your valor, yes, and
they pass that stuff out.
And your participation and the time you took out of your life to serve our country were the World War II Asiatic Pacific Occupation of Japan, Korean War, President Unit Citation, Victory Medal, Navy Unit Citation, and National Defense, United Nations. I have 2 things here I'd like to read because I think that these are wonderful words and you deserve every one of them. This is to Robert Wayne Lauritsen. To you who answered the call of your country and served in its armed forces to bring about the total defeat of the enemy, I extend the heartfelt thanks of a grateful nation. As one of the nation's finest, you undertook the most severe task one can be called upon to perform. Because you demonstrated the fortitude, resourcefulness, and calm judgment necessary to carry out that task, we now look to you for leadership and example in further exalting our country in peace. And that is signed from the White House, Harry Truman. You also became a member of the Iwo Jima Survival Association. And this is, I'd like to read this. Iwo Jima Memorial Historical Foundation Incorporated presents the Medal of Uncommon Valor to Iwo Jima Survivor Association member Robert W. Lauritsen in recognition for his combat service to his country at the Battle for Iwo Jima, World War II, where uncommon valor was a common virtue. Dated February 23rd in the year 2003, 58th anniversary of the historic American flag raising at Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima. The association that you belong to, the Iwo Jima Survivors Association, tell us a little bit about that association.
Well, I don't know as much about it as I perhaps should. It's incorporated up in Connecticut. And they have acquired a real duplicate of the statue that's in Washington, D.C. of the Marines. Have you seen that statue?
Yes.
Identical. And they raised the funds to do it. It was made with the same set of molds and the same artist that did the whole thing did this one. They seem to be more orientated towards the 4th Marine Division. But I called Washington, D.C. one time trying to find some organization to link up with. Like I told you, I just felt that I wanted to be the last one. And the woman on the phone recommended them. So I joined them and gave them a lifetime membership. And
tell us what you meant by what you just said. We'd like to have that with your film. That you plan to be, tell us what you said. You plan to be the last Marine.
The last living Marine to have served on Iwo Jima.
That's a great goal, sir.
Keeps me alive.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for coming out to the Warhawk Air Museum and allowing us the extreme honor of preserving your military history here at this museum. It's such an honor to have you here, to have met you. We can't ever thank you enough for everything you've done for our country. I know you were a young boy and did what you were asked to do to serve this country, but every single moment that you served helped to make this country what it is today, so that your children, grandchildren, and all of those great-grandchildren have the opportunity to live in the most wonderful country in the world. We can just never thank you enough for that. We hope you'll come back and visit us often, and that you'll bring all of those children and grandchildren here to see,
They're rascals.
to see what you lived through. Thank you again, sir.
Well, it's a pleasure. I hope I haven't bored you.
Oh, not in the least.